Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King, a pandemic system game from Z-Man Games. And pandemic system meaning, like, shockingly enough, it's utilizing the pandemic system that's been made famous from the game known as Pandemic, and then the game known as Pandemic Legacy, and Pandemic Fall of Rome, and Pandemic everything. There are a million Pandemic games out there, and Wrath of Lich King, the World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King joins those ranks, using the Pandemic system to take the theme of the World of Warcraft, of fighting the Wrath of the Lich King, fighting the Lich King, and going through that. Basic mechanics of Pandemic are going to be present. This is a cooperative game in which ultimately you're trying to win. You're trying to overwhelm the bad as the bad happens. Every turn, you're going to take 4 actions. Each of the characters in the game, it's a nice little print on the board. You're going to take 4 actions, primarily involving moving around the board, fighting various enemies, going on quests, things like that. From there, you're going to draw 2 hero cards. Those hero cards are going to give you cards that you can utilize shortly, and then potentially you also have cards that will put more fortresses on the board and or trigger the resetting of the cards and more bad things happening. And then from there, you spawn ghouls. You're going to go ahead and start drawing cards from that deck over there and putting a bunch of ghouls down on various spots on the board wherever it says to put them. Maybe we're going to dump one over there and dump one over there, whatever the cards say we're going to go ahead and do. And then we're going to rinse and repeat, going through that cycle again and again. We do a bunch of actions. We try to keep the world in check, and then the world starts spawning ghouls and having all the bad things happen. That's the core idea of what's going on. Now, doing that in a little bit more detail, the general idea, like I said already, you take 4 actions. You can wander from location to location, which is important to actually, well, do the things you need. To go on the quests, quests will be in specific locations. Those will be set up randomly from a variety of different quest options, so you're going to have different quests you'll be going through. You're going to be trying to keep the ghouls in check. You see, if you ever draw a ghoul, if you ever draw a card that has you putting down a ghoul in a spot where there are 3 ghouls, you're going to increase the despair over there, as well as putting one of these guys on the board, which is going to start running around chasing you. So that's never particularly good. We're going to have another one of these on the board, and those are actively moving around the board, chasing you throughout the game. So you're trying to keep the ghouls in check as you go. Now, past that, you're trying to take the quests on. The quests are a big part of the game system here, because ultimately that's how you win. You win by going through the quests, accomplishing all 3 quests, and then tackling this main quest over here, which technically should be face down until available, but you're going to go through that main quest at the end, and then start dealing with the Lich King himself. So that's the core aspect you are trying to do. You're trying to deal with these quests. When you go to deal with the quests, you'll be able to basically roll these dice to spend those actions, the icons, in order to tackle the quests. The fists are going to help you advance in the quests, and the defense, the shields over there, are going to help you prevent the quest damage. You see, every quest has a track, which you're trying to move the token around. It also has an amount of damage that's going to do to you after you've gone on the quest, as well as an ability that's relevant over here. So for instance, this quest, after each quest action, you'll spawn a ghoul on that space, which is slowly cluttering the board more and more. If you have another hero on your space, they can assist you in the quest by giving up a card as well. In addition to rolling the dice, you have the opportunity to give up a card in the quest, which helps you advance more along this track. Generally, it's going to take somewhere between somewhere between 3 and 5 quest actions to resolve a quest. Although, if you have enough heroes in your spot, maybe you can do it in 2. I've never done it in 2, but maybe you could. But that's basically the idea. So you're trying to be mindful of the quest, be mindful of the damage they do, be mindful of the ghouls and these bosses over here, these mini-bosses, because those are also going to deal damage to you. Whenever you try to eliminate ghouls, let's say this spot over here, we're going to roll the dice, we're going to use our fists. That was a great spot over there. We're going to use 3 fists to take them out, but had we instead rolled that shield, we would have used 2 fists to take these guys out, and then this one would have done 1 damage to us, but that 1 damage would be negated by our shield. So the enemies are fighting back this time around. This is not a bunch of disease cubes that you can simply take out. You're going to attack, and then the enemies attack back with whatever is left standing in the space. When you go ahead and draw cards, you'll be adding cards to your hand. Now, the cards over here are more than just set collection. The first aspect of the game is these cards are going to be utilized in the quest. You can reveal, not discard, you can reveal cards from your hand when you take a quest action to further move along this track, but you're limited in how many you can actually reveal. And additionally, cards can be discarded for the actions on them. Actions such as preventing damage to you, to adding more fists to a fight that you're in, which can be very relevant when taking down these guys, which require 3 hit symbols to take down. Actions such as moving around the board, such as resting, because you actually have a health track over here. Your characters can take damage and can die, and you want to be very mindful of that, because if your character dies, you'll be advancing to despair. And that's not good, because if you get to the end of the despair track, you lose. That's one of the many ways you can lose in this game, so it's another thing you're trying to be mindful of. But then past that, it can also trigger the escalation cards that will involve you drawing more cards on the board, reshuffling the deck, and resetting and pulling more cards, as well as advancing this marker so that you're slowly drawing more and more, potentially as many as 5 cards in a turn in the game. When you're done taking on all the quests, and it's worth noting that underneath each quest you have a fun little piece of gear that you can unlock. These are akin to the event cards in Pandemic. These are fun, powerful cards, one-time use cards you can utilize that they're random. You don't know what you're getting, but once you earn that unlock, you have some sort of helpful ability to keeping the board in check. Then when you move to the spawn ghouls, so you're going to be spawning ghouls, and these are going to be moving one space towards each hero as fast, whichever hero is closest to them, and then dealing a damage to them. So these are ever chasing you around the board, and they take 3 hits to take out, so you have to either be constantly running away, or be taking them out. Past that, when you're done with all 3 quests, you'll tackle the Lich King himself in the Ice Crown Citadel. You'll remove this, you'll flip that. The Lich King, who, by the way, I didn't really talk about it, but he's basically making the region he's in slightly more dangerous, slightly more powerful, ensuring that quests and minions deal more damage to you. But he will now go to the Ice Crown Citadel, where you can go ahead and tackle him, where he's going to start. So another quest track that you're trying to do, again, being mindful of those cards, showing those cards, so you can advance as fast as possible, while basically taking 3 damage from him every single turn. So you're trying to be mindful of your health, your resources, your cards, and of course the ever-present, slowly increasing ghouls around the board. Rinse and repeat until you win, and that is World of Warcraft, the Wrath of the Lich King. For those familiar with the Pandemic system, this has a lot of the same general notes. You can dive into it, you have the same basic structures, but it also has a lot of differences, as is usual for whenever they utilize the Pandemic system in other games. It's enough of the familiar, while having a touch of something new, which brings us to the review part of this, starting off with ease of play. Rules were very easy to go through, although keep in mind I'm coming into this as someone who's familiar with the Pandemic system, so I have that general mind model of how this game works. I can't speak to how familiar or easy it would be to dive into for someone who's not familiar with the Pandemic system. For myself who knows it, it was very easy to go through, very easy to dive into, a few pages. I would say there were 1 or 2 instances in the rules that I found to be not clear, but fortunately the rules have a lot of examples of various actions, and those cleared up any lack of clarity in the rules themselves. So overall, a net win, just with some of those being, so you want to dive into those examples when you go through it. Past that, Teach is really easy, and the game length is generally under an hour. Very reasonable, very reasonable game time for a very reasonable game for what you get in that hour time. And the table space is what you see here. Not a lot of table space. Every player has their character, and the board is on the medium to small side, so very accessible all around. As far as player count, this is a 1 to 5 player game. I've played this at 2, 3, and 4 players. I will say that in terms of solo, you always have the option of playing multiple characters. They also have a true solo mode as well, but I can't speak for that because I haven't done that. I've played it at 2 players, which I imagine is similar to playing it solo with 2 players, playing two-handed. I would say that in general, my preference is for lower player counts. I haven't played it at 5, but I definitely prefer 2 and 3 compared to 4. And to note, I'm referring to the player count, not the character count. Playing it as a 2-player game with each of you controlling 2 characters, that's great. My problem with these games is when you start moving to 4 characters, I find you do a little bit less, and you're kind of sitting back trying to not overly contribute the rest of the time, because you don't want to be constantly giving advice on other people's turns, lest you end up as an alpha player telling other people what to do as opposed to letting them discover what to do. So I find in cooperative games in general, I tend to prefer lower player counts, and this is not an exception to that. 2 and 3 were the sweet spot, and I'd happily play this solo as well, as far as playing a two-handed, diving into it like that. As far as interaction, the interaction is what you'd expect from a solo game. There's a little bit of help from the cards, so that part I do like. There's a little opportunity to play cards that will help others, helping them move, helping them heal, things like that. Past that, the interaction is generally going to come in the form of advice, in the form of telling people, hey, what about this, what about that opportunity? And I'm always mindful or wary of that, because advice is one notch away from just taking away the other player's opportunity to explore and discover pathways forward themselves. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, first of all, the abilities on cards. I like the abilities on the cards. I like the fact that you have all these different cards here that give you something else to do. It's fun that what used to be city cards in basic Pandemic suddenly has defense, and we have travel and fighting and more travel, different opportunities to do extra things that make you feel like you're a little more powerful. And speaking of which, I like the player abilities as well. The player abilities, each player comes to the table with 2 abilities, 2 ways that they can add value to the team, and I like the abilities that the players have. They give an extra spark or difference to the characters, and I'm always happy to dive in as as any single character in the game because they're all fun and different in, well, fun and different ways. And then the quest rewards as well. Those are a lot of fun. These quest rewards are incredibly powerful, giving you fun ways to break the game, lots of movement across the board, taking down a bunch of enemies at once, things that will help you throughout the course of the game, and they're a lot of fun to earn. So all the abilities of everything works well in general. And then the health of the characters. I like the new challenge that the health of the characters provide, the idea that I have to be mindful of another resource as I go through the game, another resource, specifically the health. I can go ahead and do different things. I can go on the quests again and again and again, but if I do it too often and too quickly, without pausing to heal, without pausing to be mindful of other things, then my health will slowly reduce downwards. It's another resource in the game that you're being mindful of. You don't lose if your character dies, but you do advance to despair, and that's definitely bringing you closer to losing. As far as things I don't like, to begin with, this is not really I don't like, but it's worth being mindful of. I found Wrath of the Lich King to be much easier than traditional Pandemic. Now, the reason it's not really something I don't like is the game inherently has difficulty modulation. It inherently has a bunch of ways to augment the difficulty of the game, and as such, you can move past that pretty quickly. But I will say my first game was very much a letdown, as I felt not challenged in the slightest. I never really felt the threat of death at all. And that might be that just because it's coming in with the World of Warcraft IP, it might be that they're trying to make it more accessible to people who aren't used to these games, which could well be. Once I bumped up the difficulty, then it was totally fine, which is why this is more of a word of warning than anything I didn't actually like. Past that, though, there are other things I did not like about the game. The quests feel lame. It feels like they have a lost opportunity to the quests in terms of the fact that the quests basically deal damage to you, and they have one small ability on them, and they have a whole stack of like 9 different quests that you can go through, which both affect where the quest token is, but then some difficulty, some difference as far as what the quest does, but those differences felt minimal. I feel there's a lost opportunity for the quests here to be more complex, more interesting in what one quest brings to the table versus another. I find that when I play this game, I shuffle up the quests and I don't care at all which quest I get. The characters are cool. That's great. The quest reward cards, those, which ones I get do matter. The quests themselves, I find I don't particularly care. They have small differences. This one will deal an extra damage. That one, you just do one less card. This one spawns a person. They all have different ways that they do something to the game, but none of them do I particularly care about when I'm setting up the game. It's just like, okay, great, I'll set up the game, I'll get the quests. They don't feel interesting, and I feel they could have felt interesting. The Lich King ending, speaking of interesting, the Lich King ending over here feels constantly anticlimactic as well. You go through this process of completing the quests, and you go to defeat the big bad, and it's just the same quest process. Again, there's no difference, there's no change. It's just a slightly longer track with nothing interesting happening. Not even the benefit of an ability this time. And so going through those quests every time to go through the ending of the game, again, feels a bit anticlimactic. We have this cool boss miniature, and the miniatures, by the way, are fantastic in general, and then nothing out of that, and so the ending feels anticlimactic as well. And I don't like the removal of the sets in Pandemic. You see, in traditional Pandemic, you often have sets of cards. You're trying to get a bunch of reds, a bunch of blues, whatever it is, in order to then cure diseases and things like that. In Wrath of the Lich King, you don't really ever need sets. Rather, you just have these cards. You're going to flash a card you have. You're not even going to discard it, and you use it for the quest. The collection of cards and the economy around that, while they added the health, which is a resource you do have to manage, it feels like they almost took away the management of the cards. I rarely feel starved for needing certain cards, or, oh no, I need one more yellow, I need to get that. It's kind of just, the cards are there for the abilities. And then sure, occasionally here and there, I'll flash them so that I can advance on these quest cards as well. So those also felt like a step backwards for me. Great step forward in terms of accessibility, a step backwards in terms of the reward or the interest that the game gave me. As far as what I can see others not liking, first of all, there's the dice factor over here. Pandemic in general already has a degree of randomness in the way the cards come out. Predictable randomness, which is one of the things I've always loved about the Pandemic system, and that's true here as well. That aspect that it's not completely random. I have some idea of where the things are going to be popping up, but then we still have the randomness, and then on top of that, we now have dice rolling. Dice rolling for quests, dice rolling for attacking baddies, and that it's not that many options on these dice, so it doesn't bother me that much. But if you don't like the randomness, this is just adding another element of randomness on top of the game. And then past that, the theme may or may not be a fit for you. If you're not interested in the World of Warcraft theme, if you're not interested in a general medieval setting on top of your Pandemic game, well then this might be a miss, because, I don't think you have to be interested in the World of Warcraft particularly, but you have to be interested in some way in the idea of medieval stuff spawning onto a board as you deal with it one at a time with your characters. This could be any medieval fantasy universe, but you have to be in some way interested in that as a theme. As far as final thoughts and rating on World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King, Despite all the things that I dislike about this, despite the fact that I feel it is a step backwards for me in the pandemic system, I have enjoyed my plays of World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King. It still has that staple that pandemic brings to the table, and once I modulated that difficulty up to where I needed it to be, it still has that sense of reward as I move around the board, as I coordinate with other players, as I utilize the abilities of the characters, which is, they're very well done. The abilities are very powerful, and it feels cool to be one character versus another. And then combine that to the cards. The cards now have abilities in them as well, and those are fun. It gives you a lot more moments of interesting, cool things that you can do. But it feels like it's a step forward in terms of the characters and what the characters can do, while being a big step backwards in the general system around it. Accomplishing a quest doesn't feel rewarding, it feels tedious. Defeating the final boss doesn't feel rewarding, it feels tedious. The general game difficulty, you can ramp it up, but it started off too accessible. I feel that Pandemic Wrath of the... well, not Pandemic. I feel World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King takes the Pandemic system, and for me, mostly takes it a step back, but I can also see how it's a step forward for potentially others. It's a step forward in terms of accessibility. It's a step forward in terms of the IP being accessible to others. For me, this is a good game, but a step backwards. It's going to be a 3 out of 5 for me. I enjoyed my plays with this, but I don't see myself picking it off the shelf compared to any other Pandemic system, compared to any other game in the Pandemic universe of games. It's a good game. For me, it's just not a great one. Now, whether or not this one works for you, I mean, as a beginning staple, it depends on if you like the Pandemic system. This still feels like a Pandemic game. But then past that, it depends on the changes and whether the changes work for you or not. I think it's going to be different for everyone. It depends on who you are. But past that, recommendations. If you're interested in other game recommendations, first of all, Pandemic Legacy is my favorite of the Pandemic systems. It's a legacy game. You're going to be resetting things, tearing things up. You're permanently altering the game around you. But any of the Pandemic Legacy, Season 1, 2, or 0, I think those are the best that Pandemic has to offer as a system. And if you're looking for a different game that kind of has, say, the same high notes while feeling very different, The Reckoners. I can really recommend The Reckoners as being a great game that has that same sense of slow dealing with all the small threats around you, followed by a final boss fight, but in that case, it actually feels like a final boss fight as opposed to just more of the same and a little bit anticlimactic. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this video helpful, and as always, have a good one.